Cultural integration, cultural conflict, cultural change, referring as it does both to formal principles of reasoning and to rational connections among facts and events. Logic is a treacherous word, and nowhere more, and now here, and nowhere more so than in the analysis of culture. When one deals with meaningful forms, the temptation to see the relationship among them as immanent, as consisting of some sort of intrinsic affinity or disaffinity they bear from one another, is virtually overwhelming, and so we hear cultural integration spoken of as an harmony of meaning, cultural change as an instability of meaning, and cultural conflict as an incongruity of meaning, with the implication that the harmony, the instability of or the incongruity are properties of meaning itself. As say, sweetness is a property of sugar and brittleness of glass. Yet, when we try to treat these properties as we would sweetness or brittleness, they fail to behave logically in the expected way. When we look for the constituents of the harmony, the instability, or the incongruity, we are unable to find them resident in that of which they are presumably properties. One cannot run symbolic forms through some sort of cultural essay to discover their harmony content, their stability ratio, or their index of incongruity. One can only look and see if the forms in question are in fact coexisting, changing, or interfering with one another in some way or other, which is like tasting sugar to see if it is sweet, or dropping a glass to see if it is brittle. Not like investigating the chemical composition of sugar or the physical structure of glass. The reason for this is, of course, that meaning is not intrinsic in the objects, acts, processes, and so on, which bear it, but as Durkheim, Weber, and so many others have emphasized, imposed upon them, and the explanation of its properties must therefore be sought in that which does the imposing, men living in society. The study of thought is, to borrow a phrase from Joseph Livingstone, the study of men thinking, as they think, not in some special place or of their own, but in the same place, the social world, that they do everything else. The nature of cultural integration, cultural change, or cultural conflict is to be probed for there in the experiences of individuals and groups of individuals, as under the guidance of symbols they perceive, feel, reason, judge, and act. To say this is, however, not to yield to psychologism, which, along with logicism, is the other great saboteur of cultural analysis. For human experience, the actual living through events is not mere sentience, but from the most immediate perception to the most mediated judgment, significant sentience interpreted, sentience grasped. For human beings, with the possible exception of neonates who except for their physical structure are human only imposed anyway. All experience is construed experience, and the symbolic forms in terms of which it is construed thus determine, in conjunction with a wide variety of other factors ranging from the cellular geometry of the retina to the endogenous stages of psychological maturation, its intrinsic texture. To abandon the hope of finding the logic of cultural organization in some Pythagorean realm of meaning is not to abandon the hope of finding it at all. It is to turn our attention toward that which gives symbols their life, their use. What Beans Balinese symbolic structures from defining persons, names, kin terms, technonyms, titles, and so on, to their symbolic structures for characterizing time, permutational calendars, and so forth, and both of these to their symbolic structures for ordering interpersonal behavior, art, ritual, polities, and so on, is the interaction of the effects each of these structures has upon the perception of those who use them, the way in which their experiential impacts play into and reinforce one another. A penchant for contemporizing follow man blunts the sense of biological aging. A blunted sense of biological aging removes of the main sources of a sense of temporal flow. A reduced sense of temporal flow gives to interpersonal events an episodic quality. Ceremonialized interaction supports standardized perceptions of the others. Standardized perceptions of others support a steady state conception of society. A steady state conception of society supports a taxonomic perception of time, and so on. One could be with conceptions of time and go around in either direction the same circle. The circle, though continuous, is not in a strict sense closed, because none of these models of experience is more than a dominant tendency, a cultural emphasis, and their subdued opposites, equally well rooted in the general conditions of human existence, and not without some cultural expression of their own, coexist with them, and indeed act against them. Yet they are dominant, they do reinforce one another, and they are persisting. And it is to this state of affairs, neither permanent nor perfect, that the concept cultural integration that Weber called seems to Sammenhang can be legitimately applied. In this view, cultural integration is no longer taken to be a sui generis phenomenon locked away from the common life of man in a logical world of its own. Perhaps even more important, however, it is also not taken to be an all-embracing, completely pervasive and bounded one. In the first place, and just noted patterns counteractive to the primary ones exist as subdominant but nonetheless important themes insofar as we can tell any culture. In an ordinary, quiet an Hegelian way, the elements of a culture zone negation are with greater or lesser force included within it. With respect to the Balinese, for example, an investigation of their which beliefs, or to speak phenomenologically, which experiences as inverses of what might be called their personal beliefs, their person beliefs, or of their trans behavior as an inverse of their etiquette will be most enlightening in this respect and will add both depth and complexity to the present analysis. Some of the more famous attacks upon received cultural characterizations, revelations of suspicion and factionalism among the harmony-loving Pueblans, or of an amiable side to the rivalrous Quacktuil, consists essentially in pointing out of the existence and the importance of such themes. But beyond this sort of natural counterpoint, there are also simple underbridged discontinuities between certain major themes themselves. Not everything is connected to everything else with equal directness. Not everything plays immediately into or against everything else. At the very least, such universal primary interconnections has to be empirically demonstrated, not just as so often has been the case, axiomatically assumed. Cultural discontinuity and the social disorganization which, even in highly stable societies, can result from it is as real as cultural integration. The notion, still quite widespread in anthropology, that culture is a seamless web is no less a petitio principii. That the older view that culture is a thing of shreds and patches which, with a certain excess of enthusiasm, it replaced after the Malinowskian revolution of the early 30s. Systems need to be exhaustively interconnected to be systems. They may be densely interconnected or poorly, but which they are, how rightly integrated they are, is an empirical matter. To assert connections among modes of experiencing as among any variables, it is necessary to find them, and find ways of finding them, not simply assume them. And as there are some rather compelling theoretical reasons for believing that a system which is both complex as any culture is, and fully joined cannot function, the problem of cultural analysis is as such a matter of determining the independencies as interconnections, gulfs as well as bridges. The appropriate image, if one must have images, of cultural organization is neither the spider web nor the pile of sand. It is rather more the octopus, whose tentacles are in large part separately integrated, neurally quite poorly connected with one another, and with what in the octopus passes for a brain, and yet who nonetheless manages both to get around and to preserve himself for a while anyway as a viable, if somewhat ungainly entity. The close and immediate interdependency between conceptions of person, time, and conduct, which has been proposed in this essay, is so, I will argue, a general phenomenon. Even in the particular Balinese form of it is peculiar to a degree, because such an interdependency is inherent in the way in which human experience is organized, a necessary effect of the conditions under which human life is led. But it is only one of a vast and unknown number of such general interdependencies, to some of which it is more or less directly reconnected, to others only very indirectly, to others for all practical purposes, virtually not at all. The analysis of cultures come down, therefore, not to an heroic, holistic assault upon the basic configuration of the culture, an overachieving order of orders, from which more limited configurations can be seen as mere deductions, but to a searching out of significant symbols, clusters of significant symbols, and clusters of significant symbols. The material vehicles of perception, emotion, and understanding, and the statement of the underlying regularities of human experience implicit in their formation. A workable theory of culture is to be achieved if it is to be achieved by building up from directly observable modes of thought, first to determinate families of them, and then to more variable, less tightly coherent, but nonetheless ordered octopoid systems of them, confluences of partial integration, partial incongruencies, and partial independencies. Culture moves rather like an octopus too, not all at once in a smoothly coordinated synergy of parts, a massive coaction of the whole, but by disjointed movements of these parts, then that, and now the other, which somehow cumulate to directional change, where leaving cephalopods behind. In any given culture, the first impulses toward progression will appear, and how and to what degree they will spread through the system is at this stage of our understanding, if not wholly unpredictable, very largely so. Yet that if such impulses appear within some rather closely interconnected and socially consequential part of the system, their driving force will most likely to be high, does not appear to be too unreasonable a supposition. Any development which would effectively attack Balinese person perceptions, Balinese experience of time, or Balinese notions of property will seem to be laden with potentialities for transforming the greater part of Balinese culture. These are not the only points at which such revolutionary developments might appear. Anything which attacked Balinese notions of prestige and its basis will seem at least equally portentous, but surely they are among the most important. If the Balinese develop as a less anonymized view of one another, or a more dynamic sense of time, or a more informal style of social interaction, a very great deal indeed, not everything, but a very great deal, will have to change in Balinese life, if not only because of any of these changes will imply immediately and directly the others, and all three of them play in different ways and in different contexts a crucial role in shaping that life. Such cultural changes could in theory come from within Balinese society or from without, but considering the fact that Bali is now part of a developing national state whose center of gravity is elsewhere, in the great cities of Java and Sumatra, It will seem most likely to come from without,